All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Trey with TreyMixes.com, and we're going to continue with our mixing from scratch course, and we're going to play the track real fast to remind everybody where we are, and then we're going to jump right into the next section.
Stick around, have to keep moving on. Guess one lies ahead, only one way to find out.
All right, so if you've been following along, we did our static mix, we did some edits way up front, and then last time we did some mix bus processing to get us from the static mix to an improved version of that mix. So the next thing I usually like to do is I just kind of go to the next group of instruments or the next bus down the chain of mix bus down to instrument buses or groups, then down to individual tracks. It's just how I like to do it. So I like to listen, and whatever's kind of jumping out at me is what needs the most work. We will do that first and see if we can get the most bang for our buck on improving things and getting the mix to sound better, one group of instruments at a time, and getting, like I said, the most bang for our buck on getting the thing that we know we need to work on a lot or that we can improve the most and save us more time down the way. So the first thing I want to do is we're going to go right to our drums, and this is going to be mixing drums. So we're going to listen to it in the context of the mix a little bit, and I'm going to try to listen and think about what I want to work on and think about things that I may can fix and improve in this mix. So we're going to listen, and I'll talk about what I hear.
Stick around, have to keep moving on. Guess one lies ahead, only one way to find out. Must keep on moving ahead. No time for guessing, follow my plan instead. Trusting in what you can see.
All right. When we take our vocals out, we can really start to hear some things in the drums. Like I think that the kick drum could be thumpier, get a lot more hit into your chest. I think that the kick could, the snare could use a little more crack. I think there's some boxiness happening. Even in these samples, I think that we can, in this digital drum kit, I think we can clean this up some and make it improved. It needs some compression. It needs to glue together better and sound like a real kit. We need to get some conflicting frequencies out of these drums. So always work in the context of the mix when you're trying to make sure it's all working and fitting in right. But what you can do is when you start soloing things, you can hear things a little bit better as far as the instruments go. So I think that removing things is a good thing to do in solo. If you're hearing things that are a problem and you want to get rid of them, it's easier to hear them. But when you're adding things like EQ or compression, you want to try to make sure it's working well in the context of the whole mix. Because you don't want to, who cares if the drums sound good on their own? If it sounds bad in the song or the guitars sound bad in the song, but they sound good on their own, then you didn't do yourself any favors. So we're going to work, I'm going to turn the vocals back off because they are kind of getting in the way a little bit of what can be heard here. And then we're going to go right into what I think we can do to work on this. All right. So let's do the first thing I like to do is I like to, when I add in and beef up my low end and my kick, I like to use this Pultec emulation. And I said I was going to do this with free in stock. I'm not cheating. This is free in the newest version of Logic. Some other DAWs have these emulations for modeling EQs in them now. And so we're going to use this one. This is modeled after a Pultec EQ. There are a lot of different versions of these, and you can do this stuff with any EQ. It's just I like using this one for a specific trick you can do with Pultec style EQs, and this is really great. So just by putting this on here, it adds a little bit of drive, a little bit of push to it, and a little bit of like energy and aggravation. And the first thing I'm going to do is I want to add some beef to this kick drum. And what you can do is most rock kick drums live in the neighborhood of 60. Some of these EQs are good to use so you can hear these specific frequencies instead of dragging to teeny tiny increments. These old model EQs have pre-chosen frequencies that they operate at, and 60 is where rock kick drums tend to live at, 40 to 60. So, and below 40 and 30 is pretty rumbly. With Pultec style EQs, you can do this cool trick where you can raise and cut. So you got a boost and attenuation for this frequency. We've picked 60. This will boost. This will cut. And what this does on these style EQs was an old trick of the circuitry. It's really cool that it will really focus. It won't just add a bunch of oomph to the low end. It will really focus and help keep it tight. So let's listen to that as I dial this in. So we got a lot more beef into the kick drum and those toms, but they're also kind of boxy and ringy. So you can use the attenuation knob now and do a cut where you've also boosted, and watch what happens. So it's still really tight and punchy and hitting you in the chest with that kick drum, but it's not creating a whole lot of extra fluff and mud. So I'm going to turn this on and off so you can kind of hear this. If you only take one thing away from this, this is a really cool trick. If you have access to an EQ that models this, you can do to affect your low end. That is tasty. All right. So the next thing, and again, we're working on the drum bus here, so I want to get the most bang for my buck by using the fewest amount of plugins as I can to affect the entire kit. There's going to be other things that we do further on down, because there's still EQ I need to do to this kick to help get rid of some mud in the kick, to some of the boxy warmth that's going on there. But in this situation, we want to do the most good that we can for the entire drum sound, because if I can get a great drum sound on the drum bus, I don't have to do as much work on individual tracks. So I want to work a little bit more on this snare. So let's listen to some bandwidths, some frequencies for this that maybe will affect this snare. Okay, I like 6K. Listen to the snare in the context of the mix and see how it gets a little bit more crack into it at around 6K. Yeah, it adds a lot more smack to that snare, and I really like that. Now, of course, it's adding a little bit more, because it's a really wide cue here, it's adding a little bit more to some of the cymbals too. And so we'll again try to get some of those frequencies under control, but we want to affect our drum bus the best way we can. So also what I like to do, just to get a little bit more shimmer out of our cymbals, is I like to go way up here to 20K, just about as high as you can, and start raising that frequency. The range of human hearing kind of ceases around 20K. And so anything that happens above that, you're not going to really get anything out of. But by raising it there, you're affecting the frequencies around it. It's kind of a bell shape. And so we're bringing up some more high end from 15K or up, let's just say. So let's see if we can brighten up these drums a little bit more. Absolutely. And just for kicks, let's crank our drive just a little bit. The drives here are really subtle, but I like I like just having a little bit more energy shoved into any kind of drum bus. All right, I also lowered the volume a little bit to kind of adjust for us adding so much to the drums, but I think that's a big improvement. Except, again, when you start raising some of this stuff, you're affecting other frequencies. So what I like to do also to try to just see, I think there's some boxiness going on here, particularly in the body of the snare and the body of the kick drum. And usually that lives in the 300 to 500 hertz range. So on this bottom part, I'm going to select this frequency, which at 0.3 kilohertz is 300 hertz. And then here's our dip knob, and I'm going to try to get rid of some of that. I'm not affecting any of these other frequencies, just this range. Okay, yes. Just pulling out a little in that 300 hertz range is going to help us out a little bit. So we'll turn off just this EQ and see kind of what we've done for our drums.
Find out, must keep on moving ahead. No time for guessing, follow my plan instead. Trusting in what you can see. Take my lead, I'll set you free. Follow me, set me free. Trust me and we will escape from the city.
Yep. All right. Big help we just got out of there. Just from using one EQ, we've added quite a bit to our sound. Next thing I want to do is I want to do a slight amount of compression on this drum bus and see if we can add a little bit more punch and tighten this guy up a little bit. So I'm going to use a stock compressor in Logic. It's a stereo bus, so we'll choose a stereo one. And drums tend to sound really good with our old friend, the FET. And this is a 1176 model. I'm going to turn off the auto gain because we want to do that ourselves. We'll leave it at 2-to-1 where it's at. We'll adjust it ourselves. Attack. Yeah, let's leave it about, let's start at 20 and leave the auto release on just to kind of see how much transients we're letting through.
Moving on, guess what lies ahead? Only one way to find out. Must keep on moving ahead. No time for guessing, follow my plan instead. Trusting in what you can see. Take my lead, I'll set you free. Follow me, set me free. Trust me and we will escape from the city. I'll make it through. Follow me. Set me free. Trust me and we will escape from the city. I'll make it through. Prove it to you. Follow me.
Okay, I think that's a pretty good setting for us. Lowered the threshold till we were getting about 2 to 3 decibels of reduction, and I added that back with our makeup gain. And the attack was about right. When I pulled the attack down, you could hear the snare starting to get really muffled and losing some of its punch. And that's about all I want to do as far as compression goes. Let's kind of see where it's working. We'll turn it on and off just to make sure we're getting some kind of a difference out of our drums. And I will solo them for you so that we can make this more obvious. All right, you should feel a lot more punch really coming through. And I level matched it. I pulled our output gain down by 2.5, and you can watch these levels one more time. fairly consistent across the way with lots of 13s, 14s, 15s around there for the in signal and the out signal. So one thing I like to try sometimes this is great, sometimes it's not. But in this case, we'll go ahead and we will try it. We'll kind of see if it helps us or if it hurts us. And if it helps us, great. If it hurts us, no worries. We'll just move on. But on these compressors, and the vast majority of compressors you will use, they have a sidechain input where you can tell this compressor what to listen to or what not to listen to. So if you feel like your compressor is kind of keeping your low end from hitting through quite as much as it should and adjusting the attack doesn't work, but you want to compress the whole kit, you can use a sidechain. And what this will do, we'll turn on listen so we know what we're listening to. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that the compressor doesn't hear those low frequencies and it reacts more to the snare and the cymbals and compresses those. And if the kick is really coming in really hard and heavy, it will affect a compressor faster than the snare will, and you'll really only be compressing what's happening in that volume and amount of energy that the kick is pushing through and not what the snare is giving you too. So since there's more energy there, we'll tell the compressor to ignore it so that it will still be compressing based on other input in the kit. So we're going to put it on high pass, just like an EQ, and let's listen to what it is that we're filtering out. So you can see the needle jump when the snare's hitting based on where we're putting this. And it's ignoring the kick mostly. See how much more the kick is causing it to jump, and it's probably missing some of the compression that the compressor would be putting on the snare. So let's bump it up to about, let's say about 200 and see what we get. Okay, it's really getting more of the snare. And again, I just want the needle to jump, but I don't want it to crush everything based on what the kick drum is giving me. So we'll go ahead and turn the filter on and see what we're hearing. So maybe that might be a little bit too much low end. Let's kind of see where our levels are. Very similar across the board. So let's check it with the sidechain on and off and see what we like better. We'll take it off mute. I don't know that it's really doing anything for us. Nothing's jumping out at me as being a great idea, so I'm just going to turn it off, go back to where we had it settled, and leave that as our bus compression for our drums. One of my final things I like to do for me and part of my drum sound is I like to go use saturation on my drum bus. Big deal here for me. I love this, love this, love this. This is a free saturation tool if your DAW doesn't really come with a saturation, which is slightly different than distortion, but you can head over to traymixes.com and pick up the saturation book, and this trick is in there. It's discussed in a different scenario, but this is something that I do for drums quite a bit, and this is very useful. So there's a link in there to this. You can go find this, watch the private videos, but check out this tool. All right, so what I like to do for drum kits is to keep low the saturation type, and what that tells me is that I'm getting to keep my low frequencies. They're not getting saturated. So I put it down here, and I'm going to turn this up and see kind of what a little bit of saturation does for our drum kit. It immediately makes makes a big difference. A lot of punch, a lot of more click and action and energy in this. So I'll show you what it does, just mangling it. But just a little bit goes a long way here, and it does make it slightly louder. Since this plugin doesn't have input level matching, I try to do that by ear, and I'll just pull this down, our drum bus down just a little bit, try to compensate for the volume we're adding in the saturation. Okay, that's great. Actually going to turn this down a little bit more because it's really getting me so much more click in my kick drum that while it's great for the cymbals and the snare, it's really not doing me any favors on my kick, giving me a whole lot more click because this is a clicky, aggressive, hard rock kick. Okay, that'll work for me. All right. But let's try to add back just a little bit more kick. We'll use a standard EQ just to give me a little bit more low end. We'll see what we're looking at. Okay, here's another good tip, another good lesson. Don't be afraid to add what you need to add to get the sound that you want. I wanted more thump than what just 2 or 3 dBs was giving me, so I cranked it up to 5 decibels on this, and I got what I wanted out of it. It gives me a lot more thump without affecting the click too much, and who cares? Who cares how much you have to add? Just make it sound good. Okay. I do a high-pass filter sometimes because if we're not missing anything from 30 down, we don't need it. It's just producing energy for your speakers to have to produce, and it can remove some of the energy from your mix. You'll get punchier mixes if you do more smart high-passing, and there's nothing wrong with high-passing kicks or drums. You high-pass when you need it or if you think that's going to help. So we'll flip on and off this thing if it's not affecting it. I'm going to go ahead and leave it because let's say it's producing frequencies that I can't hear or that it's mudding things up, it takes away some of the power, then I'll just leave it. Yeah, it does. It tightens things up a little bit. Earlier when I said there was some boxiness in the drums, let's see if we can find any more of that and see if we can get that out of the way and tighten up our drums a little bit better. Okay, what I did find was a resonant frequency in our snare. Let me cue this down a little bit. Okay, good. Cleaned up that snare a little bit, got that ringing out of it. See if we can find anything else down in this range we don't like. Now, see, that's providing a little bit of resonance, but that's kind of where the body of the snare is. It might be a resonant frequency, but it's not affecting us any. It's not offensive, so I'm going to keep moving. Well, let's see if taking that out helps us out a little bit. Just add a little bit more crack to the snare just because why not? All right. Sounded pretty good. Okay, now on almost every single rock mix, to get my drums as punchy as I can, I like to create a parallel bus, which I did at the start of the setup video. And so we have drums and we have parallel drums. And I like to mangle and crush and destroy the parallel drums and use a technique called parallel compression. There are a billion videos about this, but we're going to do it here too because it is super useful. So let's go ahead, and I already know what I like to use. I've gotten really used to it. I like this TDR bus compressor. It's free. And I'm going to go ahead and use the Drum Smasher preset. Adjust the threshold where I'm getting about 10 decibels of gain reduction. I like these settings, this 4-to-1 ratio, this super fast attack, super fast release, and then we'll adjust our volume appropriately. Now, I send the drum bus as a pre-fader send so that it is everything before my drum bus is going to the parallel drum bus. So that means that regardless of what anything is happening on this drum bus, the original tracks are all going to the parallel compression bus. So I'm going to go ahead and kill this fader so we don't immediately get double mint action, double mint fun, and blow our ears out. Okay, we are compressing the dog out of this. So let's just listen to the parallel, and you can hear what it's doing. Tell you what, I'm going to do the exact same thing with the snare. We're going to send a pre-fader snare send. Do the exact same thing. All right, we're compressing some frequencies that I don't like, so let's go ahead and try to EQ those out in front of the compressor. Cool. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to, and you could do this with or without the overheads of the cymbals. Sometimes the cymbals get too washy. Sometimes they get too gritty, distorted. If that's the case, when we add this in and our cymbals become harsh and unbearable, then I'll show you how to reroute this to where we're just using the snares, the toms, the kick. So let's go ahead and introduce our drums back into this. And we'll we will push our parallel compression into our drum sound. Okay, I am a little not super happy with the cymbals being in there. So I'm going to leave the snare bus where it is. We're going to turn off this bus. We'll just turn it off. And we will come down here and route just the kick to the parallel drums. Same thing, pre-fader all the way. The snare is already going. We will route the toms as well. Pre-fader. And now let's see what we get. So with the changes in the volumes of the faders that we're sending, the source material that we're sending, we had to adjust the threshold a little bit to mangle it some more. And so let's see where we end up adding this back in. Okay, we'll try it in the mix. Absolutely. That kick really comes to life, starts getting punchy, really hitting you. I love it. Kick, the snare, and the cymbals were just way too washy. So, no big. We'll just take them out of the parallel compression chain and not worry about it. I also like to try to see what distortion and really saturating my parallel chain does. So let's see what happens here. Adds a lot of grit to that. So again, since it's adding so much volume, we'll rebalance our parallel compression and see what we end up with. It's a subtle thing. It's nice to have that extra grit. A little bit more ring in that snare mic could come out, but we'll see what we get when we move on to our next portion, the snare drum bus. So the context of our mix, I think our snare sounded pretty good. And so if there doesn't seem to be anything that's just like jumping and screaming out at me, I'll sometimes compress first. So let's see if in the mix, that little extra ringing that is more obvious now that we pulled out other resonant tones, we'll see if that's still a problem. Doesn't seem like it. So let's go ahead and compress this guy, and let's see what we can get out of our wonderful, fantastic 1176 emulating compressor. When it comes to snares, I like to start at about 4 to 1. We'll worry about that in a second. With a fairly slow attack to make sure we get our transients in and a really fast release. We'll leave auto on for the moment, and we'll just kind of see what kind of sound this compressor gives on our snare. All right, let's try it. We'll match our levels. Is a little bit louder. We came in with. Okay, that's fairly close. Add a little distortion drive on the compressor just to help add some more aggression to it. I like distorting just the crap out of my drums. So anyway, the attack I left kind of open so that the crack of the snare comes through. It doesn't grab that, but it kicks in slightly after the transient hits and compresses the rest of the sound, and the fast release helps bring that sound back up at the end. We make up gain what we're compressing out of it, and we get ourselves a bigger, much bigger, well-compressed snare. Absolutely. All right, let's put all that back in. All right, let's try EQing our snare a little bit in the context of this and get rid of things we don't need. Down to our bus here. So you could see here in this sample on this electric kit, even here we have low end that will pop up. It's kind of compressed air that came in on the sample, what have you, that gets in the way. It's not necessary for the snare. All that is producing frequencies in the same range as the kick and the bass also. So let's filter some of that out, and I'll make it obvious when it happens again where you can see it. See all that down here in 80, like we don't need that out of the snare. So I'm gonna roll this up to about 90. Keep this fairly gentle curve on it. We don't want to get phasey, make it sound unnatural. we're not losing anything from that. Okay, so let's see what else we can do about this snare. Let's see if some of those, with the compression, some of the ringing frequencies are going to probably pop through again. So let's have another listen. There's still a lot of going on in this 500 range. Let's see what we're hearing. Yeah, in this whole 3 to 5 range, we're getting a lot more ring. Of course, it's very obvious when you turn it up that high. You don't need to dip out a ton. Let's just see what we need to dip out. Okay, that's a lot better. All right, at least it's less ringy. We might can add some more meat back into it later, but I realize this video has kind of gotten away from me in terms of time. I just love doing this so much and talking about it. We're going to stop right here for drums. We'll continue doing drums next time, where maybe we do a little bit more volume adjusting, add some meat back to the snare, and getting maybe the kick is a bit too clicky still. The toms need to get improved. They're a little ringy. So we'll get down into the individual tracks where we can start affecting some of these problem scenarios that maybe we can improve. Remember, like, subscribe, hit the little notification bell, traymixes.com, get yourself an ebook. Thanks for sticking around if you made it this long, and we're going to keep going. I don't know how many parts this series is going to be. I'm just going to go through this process. It's a real reactive process, and when you hear one thing, you work on it. When you see that maybe changes a different thing, maybe you got to work on that. If I had to do all this over again, maybe I would do it slightly differently based on what I hear then, or maybe or maybe someone who makes a suggestion. Maybe you learn something new along the way. So I'm not putting any expectations or limits on this series. So just keep coming back, keep watching. I hope they're very useful for you. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.